To start on this gun debate because, as I say, even before the second term is officially underway, this debate is well underway. Here are the highlights of what the president wants to accomplish with comprehensive gun control. Universal background checks he'd like to pursue, a ban on high-capacity magazines, an assault weapons ban that, of course, lapsed in 2004, and he'd like stricter laws on gun trafficking. But Senator Schumer, just as I challenged Wayne LaPierre of the NRA on this program very hard when this initially came up, I challenge you as well with the question of, is this really going to make a difference? And Rich Lowry wrote something that caught my attention in the National Review, and I'll put it up on the screen. He writes this: unfortunately, no one can write a law against mothers owning guns that one day might be turned against them by deranged sons who then commit horrific acts of murder-suicide. Shooting rampages are very hard to prevent because they're so often committed by disturbed young men without criminal records who don't care if they're caught and usually want to die. These are adult facts that don't intrude on the childish world of White House policy making. He notes Adam Lanza in Newtown. His own mother, of course, passed a background check.
Right. Here's the bottom line. These laws are not perfect, and you'll always find certain exceptions, but they make a huge difference. Every major person who has studied the Brady Law, which is the most significant gun safety law we've passed since in the last 20 years, has said it has reduced gun violence dramatically. Law enforcement is totally for the Brady Law. And the idea that felons or people who are mentally infirm or people who are spousal abusers should be allowed to buy guns, most everyone agrees on that.
But there's no overwhelming evidence that the assault weapons ban dramatically reduced this incidence of violence, nor was there an uptick in this kind of violence once the assault weapons ban lapsed.
Well, the bottom line is that during the 10 years that the assault weapons ban was in effect, the use of those weapons in crimes went down a significant percentage.
Senator, is there any gun regulation, any restriction of gun rights that you could accept, that you could vote for?
Well, sure. I think the fact that we have background checks when people buy firearms and we prevent felons and those with serious mental illnesses from acquiring them, I think those make perfect sense.
So a universal background check is something you could support?
The current state of the law is those background checks are in place when a licensed firearm dealer sells firearms. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement on the quality.
Because 40% of the sales are private citizen to private citizen. That's the loophole we talk about.
Well, except that statistic is actually pretty bogus. It's based on a study before the background checks were put into place. And so that study is highly questionable, that 40%.
I don't know, Wayne LaPierre never questioned that study when I brought up that point. He had a question about the feasibility and collecting records, but there is still a loophole that a lot of people would like to correct.
You know, there actually isn't the so-called gun show loophole. That doesn't exist. Any licensed firearm dealer who sells at a gun show has to have a background check. It's a requirement that applies to every licensed firearm dealer. What it doesn't apply to is personal sales one-on-one, and that's true whether it's at a gun show or not.
Senator Schumer, is this the most likely area of agreement, yes, a universal background check, even more than an assault weapons ban or magazine ban?
I'd say this is the sweet spot in terms of actually making us safer and having a good chance of passing. This is it. Right now, I'm the author of a universal background check bill. I am talking to pro-gun Democrats, excuse me, and Republicans. And I think you're going to see, a very likelihood in the next week or two, a proposal that has broad support for universal background checks. And I would say this to my friend Ted: if you are someone who's not a felon, you go into a gun store, a registered firearm dealer, and buy 20 guns, which you can, he'll do a background check on you. You can sell them to anyone you want, felon or anybody else. So there are huge holes in this law. And I would say this: the last time we made progress on the pro-gun safety side was tightening up this law for mentally ill people in 2007. I carried the law, and the NRA actually didn't oppose it. So I think this is the best chance of getting something done, and I think you're going to find much broader support than we ever imagined.
It's interesting, Senator Cruz. The president said, look, to those Americans who live in states like your own, where there are very strong gun rights representatives, you're the ones who have to rise up and pressure those senators and congressmen and demand an assault weapons ban, a ban on magazines. And I wonder if the National Rifle Association has helped his cause with an ad that was released this week that talked about armed security guards. The president's skeptical that those could work, did not rule it out, but talking about the president's children and that issue of security. Watch a portion of that ad.
Are the president's kids more important than yours? Then why is he skeptical about putting armed security in our schools when his kids are protected by armed guards at their school?
Over the line?
Look, I'm going to let people decide to run what ads they want. I do think there is a fundamental point here, and there is a point of hypocrisy when it comes to gun control. That many of the proponents of gun control are very wealthy, live in communities where they can outsource police protection. But you have a lot of people that are worried about preserving the safety of their own home. If you're talking to a single woman living in Anacostia who has the misfortune to live next to a crack house, to tell her she doesn't have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms, I think is fundamentally wrong.
Senator, this is a narrower point about armed guards in school. This happened to be an ad that's factually inaccurate. The president's children are protected by the Secret Service, and that's not their own choice. And yet you're trying to make a broader point, which I understand. But you think this is a constructive part of the debate and moving the public mood?
What I don't think is constructive is what the president is doing right now, which is within minutes of that horrible tragedy in Newtown. The president began trying to exploit that tragedy to push a gun control agenda that is designed to appeal to partisans, designed to appeal to his political partisans. Number one, it would have done zero to prevent the crime in Newtown. Number two, many of the provisions are contrary to the constitutional protection of the Second Amendment. But number three, they don't work. You know, Chuck said a minute ago, the assault weapons ban was tremendously successful. The assault weapons ban was one of the least successful bills that has ever been put in place. And in fact, when the ban expired, there were roughly 700 murders using all rifles. Today, there are roughly 300. There's less than half. This is not designed to actually solve the problem of violent crime. This is designed to assuage liberal partisans who want to push.
And Senator Schumer, to challenge you, the president did not challenge any people in his liberal base. He talked about all these measures. He did not talk about video games. He didn't talk about violence in Hollywood, where he gets a great deal of his campaign funds. He didn't do anything to make his own folks uncomfortable. He just said to Senator Cruz's constituents, rise up and force him to vote for gun control.
David, I don't think that's fair. The president has talked about generally dealing with violence in our society. I agree with that. But to take guns off the table, you know, to not talk about guns when it comes to gun violence is to not talk about smoking when it comes to lung cancer. It just doesn't make any sense. It's part of the problem, and we have to deal with it. Now, I agree with Ted. There's a right to bear arms. I want to see that lady, if she wants to have a firearm in her house, have it. And I think those of us in the pro-gun safety movement should accept the Heller decision and say there's a constitutional right to bear arms, and it's no less important than the right to free speech, the right against search and seizure. But Heller also said that there should be reasonable limitations. They're allowed reasonable limitations. I don't think that lady needs an assault weapon. I don't think she needs a 100-round clip. I don't think, for instance, that those things would help her in any way. And so to say she has a right to bear arms, yes. To say, just like on the First Amendment, we say you can't scream fire in a crowded theater falsely. We have anti-pornography laws. We have anti-libel laws. There are reasonable limitations. And some in the pro-gun movement, and the NRA in many instances, doesn't believe in any limitation at all. That is not unconstitutional. That just is dumb.
Let me move on to the debt. This issue will continue. So will the issue over the debt. And Senator Cruz, House Republicans have taken a step back on this debt ceiling standoff. Should it be raised? This is how the New York Times described it over the weekend. I'll put it up on the screen and have you react to it. Backing down from their hardline stance, House Republicans said Friday they would agree to lift the federal government's statutory borrowing limit for $3